Hello and good evening to our today's webinar, DxO PhotoLab, my workflow, presented by Jochen Kohl. And maybe first I have to apologize. I'm not a native speaker. I come from Germany, so please be gentle with me. What we talk about tonight will be DxO PhotoLab and especially my workflow with it. For the people who are visiting this as a first webinar, listening to DxO. DxO is a company based in Paris. They have ambient technologies and over 400 million devices. So that's the way they create their software, what we were talking about tonight, DxO PhotoLab. And to introduce myself, I'm a German-based photographer. I'm working here since over more than 20 years now with a big commercial studio in Wuppertal, close to Düsseldorf. And besides my work as a commercial photographer, I'm on stage for companies like Blazing Flash, Tamron, Novaflex, Ilford, Datacolor, and obviously DxO. And what we will show you tonight is my typical workflow, or with other words, one of the possibilities for a typical workflow with DxO PhotoLab. So what you see here already is the first step in DxO PhotoLab. It's our full-size viewer, which gives us the possibility to rate and tag images, also to compare it between the way I've edited, and gives me access information and shortcuts for the way for editing an image. I will answer all your questions about this after the webinar, so stay tuned. After my monotone speaking, we'll have a question and ask round. But for the people who are asking already, yes, the webinars will be recorded and they will be shown on the DxO tutorial website as the webinars before. But because we will have two English webinars about the workflow and two German webinars about the workflow too, there will be only one of them, I guess, showed at the recorded version. They're nearly the same, but I will use always different images to show you the different way of a workflow. So if you're interested, just watch both or watch one and the other one maybe at the recorded one. So hopefully this will be a good answer for the first questions we had incoming already. So DxO, what is it doing? It's a little bit different compared to other raw converters. So we're not working with importing or images in our database. You import your images first from your SD card or your camera directly and store them in folders in places where you want to have to be them. In my case now, I just put them on the desktop to make it a little bit easier for tonight's session. So we see here the main directory of my computer. We're on the desktop, and here I have the different directories we will talk about tonight. This is named EN for English version, where I only had my first images in. So we will jump to our webinar directory. And the first thing which pops up by beginning a workflow, even before we set any preferences, the computer software shows me that we are missing an optic module, the one from the D700 and the Tamron SP7200. You see it down here in my image browser too. These images are marked with a little green camera. This tells me, hey, I'm missing an optical module. So I say, okay, I want to have it to be downloaded. A simple click and it disappears. Now the corrections can be used. For the questions, what are the corrections? The optical modules automatically correcting distortion, vignetting, they do an lens sharpness, adding to the image, and they're removing the chromatic aberrations. If it's, as I said before, your first webinar, your first steps with DxO PhotoLab, we have an excellent webinar on our tutorial base, getting more into the details for the basic steps. So here I will just talk a little bit quickly over it. You have it here on the top line, for example, in preferences, where you can choose if you want to have a DxO standard preset for the new raw images. And DxO standard means, in this case, the optical module is being used. Of course, for RGB images like JPEG or TIFF, I don't want to have it to be used because I might have added these images before. Display settings, as in other softwares, of course, you can a little bit customize the look at. The thumbnails, as you can see here, red, green flags, how I tag the images or rate them on the flyover or always. If I fly over it, you will see now they're showing up. Forgetting if they're not there. Processing stays the same. And for not just hitting it accidentally, I hide my delete button. This comes only on the flyover. Shows up here. Process is how I want the processed images being called, and I use sidecars for my raw images too. Advanced, this works quite good with the performance of my computer. So here you can have an extra look what suits you the best. So first of all, what I would do starting with DxO PhotoLab was a normal daily workflow when it comes to me editing images. I have the possibility, of course, to have a look here in the small image browser or rate and have a look at pictures, bringing them to full size. Here I can have a look if I want to rate them as maybe as a star image and say, okay, I'm using today images with stars. So I can, that's a good idea from me for images I want to work tonight with. So I rate them. I rate them in different ways always when I have a look. Today we talked about workflow, so we'll obviously rate more images from landscape shots because we have tomorrow's session only about portraits, so we will have the portraits leaving for tomorrow. What I've done now, of course, I've rated images which are all in one folder. So here now, of course, I can have the possibility to set a filter to say I don't want to have images with no star not shown up, so it would filter me these images and I could work only with the images shown by the star. But what happens if there are images from different folders? Like if you can set up a session or a catalog in a different software, you're mixing images. Over here, I might want to have added different images from different folders, bring them into one. And that's what we called a project in DxO PhotoLab. So we decide maybe to get a couple of images into tonight's project, and by pressing them and then just keep the command button. I'm working on a Mac, on a Windows, it might see a little bit different. I just hold it and I select some images I want to have a look at into tonight's session. And with a left mouse button click on one of the images, it tells me create a new project from current selection. Yes, and that's what we want to do tonight. It's my webinar project. And now it shows up here. And as I said before, because I want to add images, maybe from a different directory and not always jump between the two folders, I want these three coming as well to my actually project. And I could create one or add current select into project. It's a webinar, so I have them in the webinar project. If you delete images in a project, don't worry about it. You keep them, of course, in your folder. So quite shortly, I would at this stage jump to the customize version. And here, of course, as well, I got the opportunity to have a look at my images in the full size mode, not only as I showed before in the organizing mode. And if you work the first time with it, you have the opportunity to see here on the top, of course, all the small features explain to you how you reach the different kinds of viewing in an image. Fitting to screen, full size, the full screen viewer, and after you reached it, you get out simply with escape. And if you sometimes do not know, you got this little question mark, and this question mark will follow you through the entire software. So you will have in all sliders a small question mark which helps you to understand this part of the software. And here, for example, if you're not sure how you zoom in or you tag or you even exit your screen, you always got a small explanation. So simply hit the escape and we are back on the image. One important question always here is, it's a little overload sometimes. So you got, of course, opportunity to create your own workspace, what I do, of course, during my workflows. So I have a own workspace for myself where I feel more comfortable using it, but today we will keep to the standard workflow and workspace so you can easier follow the steps where I'm editing images. Creating a workspace is really, really easy. You can simply grab, with clicking the mouse and holding it, one of the windows and just move it around where you want to have it. So now I got my film pack controls on this window, and I even could leave the screen and place it on a different one. In this second, I got it on a different window. And if I make mistakes or I do not like something, I can simply go back to the standard workflow and the standard workspace, and brings me back where I've started. So do not worry, you cannot mess anything up. There's always a way back. The same is for the image browser here, of course. However it suits your screen, you simply can move it smaller or bigger. Or, of course, you got the opportunity to undock the image browser. So this is a quite suitable way of working with the two, that when you have two screens, you can have one for editing and have a larger screen on the other computer or on the other monitor for your image browser. So it leaves you more space for editing. In this case, I bring him back here for helping us to see the images and maybe grab one of the other images you might see and ask me later on, easy as it goes. You see here this little marks on the side, so you can open and close the editing windows on both sides to give you a more handy workspace where you can go through the image. In this case, I've added the image before, but I will go through with you how I would do it in a normal way of workflow, and don't worry about maybe we end up in a different kind of image. You always have the possibility to edit pictures in a lot of different ways by simply creating virtual copies of these images. This will not copy the raw file or waste a lot of space on their computers. It's only editing the DOP file close to your image, and the DOP file is the file where we store the information about our editing. If you haven't seen it before, we have a look in our English webinars. You see here these little DOP files next to the images we touched and edited. These are the files where our editing is saved. So always keep the raw and the DOP file if you want to get back to the editing you've done before. So as I said, we start obviously from a completely entire image. So we have the possibility of resetting the image. And here it's asking me if I'm sure, and of course I'm sure. And this is the image nearly how I shot it. It's been reset, but as I said before, I work with the DxO optical module as a standard. So smart lighting is one point which is activated. It controls a little bit the highlight and the shadows, and it's activated in the slide motion by starting. The noise reduction is on always. The crop is on auto mode. It's not cropping something. It's only in auto mode if you're doing later on some corrections like perspective control, so it crops out the corners. What we were talking as well, it's lens sharpness. What's on, and if you see like this little eye here, this always tells you that you only can see differences in editing the image when you're now, for example, in a zoom level higher than 75%. So you might have to zoom into an image to see the sharpness. And if we deactivate lens sharpness, you see directly it gets a little bit softer, and it's not like an unsharp mask. This really makes an analysis of the image. In this case, the combination of the D700 and the 70-200 Tamron lens, and gets an analyzing where is the weakness of this combination, and it's getting it controlled with lens sharpness. And as all of our controls, which being automatically used in DxO, you always have the opportunity to arrange them locally, global, manual. So even if there's an automatic version or automatically control, you always have access to it, and you can control it manual. As we said to the other ones which are controlled is the chromatic aberration. And this is a function where you sometimes think, okay, I do not see any difference between switched on or switched off. This is simply because chromatic aberration is not shown in every image. It is shows only up with a wide open aperture, a high contrast, where you have really like a chrome. Like here, like we have this tire showing only this one. It's an old image. We always bring that up in all our webinars simply because this one shows you the difference between chromatic aberration switched off, and now you see here, if we even zoom into 200%, you see what you got, all this purple fringing, you see the green cast, and the automatic correction in chromatic aberration removes it. So this, just short, as I said before, you will see this in detail in our DxO tutorial website from our last recording webinars. So do not wonder if sometimes you have a function active, like here, chromatic aberration, and you cannot see it in the image. I mean, this is a well-corrected lens, 70-200 millimeters, shot not wide open, shot at f4, 100 millimeters. There are no chromatic aberrations which you would see in the image. So the correction is automatically on, but it's not destroying the image. It's not taking anything off the image. It's simply really would get it out if it would be in the image. And the other one we have is the vignetting. You see up here the little cursor one, which shows you back to full screen or fitting screen, full screen. comparating slider, which helps me sliding through images like no corrections. Here you see how our images would be before and after editing. So, and if we went back, we will see on the fit screen how much the vignetting was and at a fore, and you see it's really just a slightly edge. So do not wonder if sometimes you see an automatic control working, but you cannot see it in the image. And as we started before, we put our images into the project folder, and there we will carry on working. And here we are, customizing it, creating back our virtual copy to see really what we will do with our image. Here it is, uncorrected, coming back from the start. And the first I'm doing is, before I have a look at the image, what is disturbing my view. I choose this image and I shot a few shots from the Academia Bridge, but I choose this one because I kept this little walkway here. I don't want to have it slightly more cut than it looks like that the boat's coming from nowhere, so I wanted to keep this walkway, but my view is a little bit disturbed by these parts of flags of the building coming in. So in my kind of workflow, I start getting these ones removed, and for this case I use the repair tool we see over here on the top. So I simply paint with my repair tool over the parts of the image which are disturbing my view at this point, and I've got a cleaned image for that case where I see, okay, now I like the look on the left side. I'm talking to people and they ask me, when do you crop the image? Like, okay, there's a part I don't like, I crop it out. No, I do crop my image at the end of my workflow. I even save sometimes the image without cropping, simply because I'm a guy who's doing prints a lot of time, and if I have to make a special print and put it in a frame, and the frame is not exactly the same like 3:2, they want to have it maybe framed into a 4:3 frame or so, I might need some space in the image. I would have cropped out because it's not necessary for the image itself, but I might need it when I want to put the print into a frame. What I do first, of course, is corrections like turning the image, doing the repairs. And after I've done this, I follow a simple rule, getting through DxO PhotoLab. We have our first fields here, essential tools. They are the essential ones. They are called because essential because you use them quite often. I close them directly because they're here and they will repeat themselves in their parts of light, color, details, and all this. If I have a look at exposure compensation, would be a global shot I would do if I wouldn't have a not correct exposed image. In this case, I'm quite happy with the exposure. We have a lot of parts which are really light up in the image, so you won't have with a motive like this a really well controlled histogram, but you can have a look at showing you blown out highlights or parts without any structure in there. You see here you can get them active if you want to, so it shows up in an image. And then I start having a look at what I really want to do with an image. And what disturbs me first is it's a little bit, of course, dark in this part. And here we come to our local adjustments. I've here can create always a new mask with it. And if I'm getting in, I got the options between a brush, a graduate filter, a control point, an auto mask, an eraser which erases what I brushed in first. I can choose new mask, or I can reset it. In the middle of, again, I got a little question mark, and I said before, by hitting the question mark, you always got explanations of what every tool is doing. So in this case, I might use a brush, and you see the size of it, the two circles, in the middle it's cyan blue, that's where I will paint, and you see the bigger circle, that's the kind of the feathering of the brush. If I set to 100, you see how the feathering between the really heavy point in the middle goes out, feathering more to the outside, so you can avoid this hard corners and this. At this point, you have a flow and opacity. The flow simple means if you keep on brushing, it will always add more and more of the control you just did. For example, I start brushing in here. My equalizer opens, and if I do a slightly exposure control, and I keep on brushing and brushing and brushing, it adds always until it reaches the opacity of 100%. If I would have a flow of 100 and set the opacity slow, I can brush all the time, but it would stay only at this opacity. This we have to have in further steps, local adjustments, explained deeply in our tutorial based on the webinar. So I thought, okay, this is a little bit too dark for me. And you see, you can, because we're feathering quite well, we do not have to work so accurate. And to see it sometimes even more, you can overuse the exposure you want. Then you see, okay, I miss a little bit here, and I start brushing a little bit more in there. Now you see the first problem. I want to brush here, but I got this equalizer, which is disturbing me. And by simply pressing E for equalizer, it disappears out of my image, and I can keep brushing in there and coming quite fast. The next thing disturbing me, which is only a local disturbance for me in the image, is this area here. You see, it looks like it's a little bit, it's from the water taxi, from the water bus, the bus stop. It looks a little bit oversaturated, so I want to create a new mask here. You see, this one is now grayed out, and I can paint in here new and make sure that I get here a little bit less saturation, a little bit upper exposure, getting the eraser out and paint it a little bit more in. You have it controlled, and if you see, I might slide here in the water, and this is a point where we can stay in the mask, getting an eraser, and with the size of the eraser, we can brush this back out. So after I controlled a bit my local adjustments, I go further on the global image. But it doesn't mean that I now finished once the local adjustments, I won't touch them again. It's like I will jump forward and backwards maybe if I will do now something in my tone curve. So we started with smart lighting. If you see, if you switched one off, we can leave it like this. We have the selective tones, which we have for the highlights. And there we see already, okay, highlights getting off would be nice for our blue cast over here, but of course it's destroying me a little bit, the highlight there. So I have this in mind, okay, maybe I have to touch this globally, locally again. Having a look at the midtones, and this one can come up a bit. Lighten up the shadows, because what I have in mind is not like getting a cleaned technical image. And the second I start editing an image, I start with an idea I have in mind, like I want to give it a little soft 60s, 70s look. Not with a preset, I want to do it step by step. But this is what I have in mind. If I would have a black and white image in mind, or want a nice saturated pop-up one, which I want to print on an LED bound or so, I would go different. And this time I simply jump on here, going for this image I have in my head I showed you before. We have the clear view. And I say, wow, nice one, but I don't want to have it really all in the buildings and the water, but it's quite nice over in the sky. So at this point, say, okay, clear view I didn't mind have in my mind. I'm jumping back to my local adjustments. And in this case, I say, okay, getting a graduate filter. Here it was a little bit missing, and you can see I can turn him and move him a bit. I wanted to have clear view added at this point of the image a bit. So now I got an equal look through my sky, which I didn't have before. I said, okay, was a good idea, clear view having here. So I jump back to my local adjustments. This is one of my advices when you create, or you will create your own workflow using DxO PhotoLab. Never been stuck in one image or in one controller, one slider. Jump back and forwards. You might add a controller adjustment which is not really acting well with the one before, with like the clear view now, or the contrast effect in the clear view. So I edited the local adjustments again. The contrast. While switching it on, you see automatically micro contrast works automatically. This has a face detection like our smart lighting does. It jumps on to 16, and as I talked to you before, this little question marks showing up nearly everywhere, and if you hit on them, you see it opens up a new window explaining you what's happening, because I not only have the question mark, I have a little plus on here too, and if I press on the plus, even more sliders coming up. So if you now sit in front of a software without these sliders, this is simply because I have a film pack installed, as it tells me here, film pack 4 Elite is required. This gives me fine contrast, highlights, midtones, and shadows. Besides, so I have the control over my contrast for the different tones. So people always ask me, of course, you can create a great image too, with simply giving them, working with contrast and micro contrast. And micro contrast is like even kicking out a little bit the sharpness of an image. And what we can nicely add to a colored image, we will see tomorrow night that we don't want to really use it working on portrait modes. Now we're entering the tone curve. The tone curve is not only like on the master, which is affecting the whole one, it gives us control for the different colors too. And if I'm on the red one and you play a little bit with it, and you see if I just push it, you're getting the look we had before showed in the image. And here it comes now on your personal workflow, not for an image which tells you, wow, this is the perfect image we're editing. No, this is one of the personal taste you have in photography. It's the creative stuff. For this image tonight's editing, I really like to push the reds a little bit in the midtones. So the midtones getting a little bit more red in here gives me this look I preferred. We showed in the beginning, the master file, you see again, if you're here, for example, lighten up the blacks, it gets a little bit softer than the black. I want this, I don't want to have it so strongly contrasted. And given it the gamma, which lightens up the blacks and gives us a little curve in the gamma curve. And you see we're getting an image more slightly. And now I see, okay, I now like the look, but what I said before, the exposure is okay here. Now I say, okay, now it might be a little bit overexposed. And I get it back controlled in my exposure compensation for keeping back the exposure I had before I worked on my nice tone curve. And in this case, I only touched the black points. You have the white ones. When the 255, for the black, the gamma for the stuff. So you can act here. Reactive vignetting was our automatic mode. As we said before, this grade's not affecting too much. We do not have to touch it here. We're entering our color part. The white balance in this case, I haven't touched at all, as you see. I'm here in this image, staying on the auto white balance my camera offered me, but we will see on the second image that we have a completely different workflow where the white balance is much more important when we will add a black and white image later on. We have color accentuation, vibrancy, and saturation. Vibrancy simply forces us a little bit more saturation, the blue tones, and not getting so much force in the reds, because this is suiting our image with the blue sky and the water quite well. I'll leave the saturation untouched in this case. Color rendering explains you too what it is if you're really interested, and tells you again, well, I saw it in your webinar, I can't see it here. They come up with some profiles, and even more I got in here because I have Film Pack installed with my PhotoLab. But we want to see today how it goes manual and not by editing one of the color renderings. But if you have Film Pack, just play with it around. You got plenty of different options. You can give it to camera body look. You can see different colors and body films, and you see all the film looks you could give it to it. But as I said, we today work on our manual mode and we switch it off. But what you see here, of course, because we just add Aqua Caesar 100, it changed a little bit the color information. We got a burned out color information in our sky. I switch it off. And my color warning I had activated on my histogram first disappears. Style toning would give us a chance to get a black and white landscape portrait stuff. We don't need it. We've done a lot already up to now. And we got use saturation light. And if you don't know it again, I advise most of the people, open the question mark in your software. It explains you what it's doing. And we have to work with it. You control, of course, the different colors. And you can control the different colors in the hue, saturation, and luminance. What I do first, because sometimes it looks like a blue, is it the blue or is it not? I got desaturation and you see it, yes. It is acting, definitely the water, and then I think we could work on here and see a little bit how we might further push it. And then you see if you do it too much, on this part of the boat here in the image, there is no blue. It's still the same water, but because of the sun and the reflection, this part here is not affected by the blue channel of the image. So always watch out when you do things like that. Not say, okay, the water is blue, I can do it. You will see it gets a really, really bad effect on the image. Be really gentle with these sliders. Always have a look after you add. I can live with this little start, especially if I light up the luminance a bit. And here it comes to your personal taste of how you much add to it. I would have a look how much yellow we have in our image, pure yellow. And it's not so much. It's mostly really the heavy bus taxi stops and a little bit in the buildings. So I can go here back to my problem I had in the beginning too, which is oversaturated bus taxi stops, which I do not like in the image. So I have them controlled here a little bit, lighten them up a little bit too. So they're looking a lot of more used now and fitting the look of the image I wanted to create here. Brings us back to noise reduction But hey, we're shooting at the base ISO of 200, so do not worry about the noise reduction here, but we will have a look in a minute. Lens sharpness, we talked about chromatic aberrations. We didn't have it in the image. As you saw before, we had it in the chrome tire. The repair tool, you find it here as well, which we have up on the top in our mask. As well, if you switch it off, my flags coming back in. Switch it back on, my flags are going. The unsharp mask, this is a sharpening tool we use when we do not work with a raw image where we have the lens softener. More we don't have here, we do not have a person with a red eye. Then we have the classical geometric controls, focal length and focus distance we could add if we coming manual up there. The distortion in this case is based on our module and it's slightly corrected, as you can see. I do not need in this case a horizon correction because I was quite lucky, and when I shoot I always not only look through my view in the camera, I look always on the sides, on the framing, and trying to find a fitting that I do not lose my straightened lines in the image, so I most of the time do not have to change horizon in my shots. If of course you have more viewpoint and film pack, which are two other options we can add. If we have still time in the image in our webinar tonight, we have a look at, or later in the questions round as well. If I now would go there, I would say, okay, I saved this image and I would start exporting this image first here to disk because I want to save my image. I got the opportunity to export it to disk, to another application if I want to carry on working there, to Lightroom, where I do not use it because I do my editing here and I got a different kind of getting or work with my images. If I need something else, it's application like Photoshop or sometimes Capture One, but not doing email. I can always have Facebook twittering. But if I go to export to disk, it opens me different options of saving the image. And I would save my first image already, and I'm not even ready with the image where I want to go to. The simple reason, I feel I could add a little bit grain to the image. So not so losing this digital look. But before I would do this, I would save it once, because if I want to print it, I will get the structure out of the paper I print my digital file to. If I present it on screen, I have to add it on the digital version. So here you got different ways of exporting as a 16-bit TIFF file. You do not lose any of the image quality if you export it as a JPEG. JPEG is only an 8-bit version. It still looks okay, but you cannot edit again basic on a JPEG so much because you will lose a lot of the color information. So in case you choose different ones, you can even export different options at the same time. There's no problem doing that. You can resize the images when you want it in different interpolations. You can add an ICC profile for your export image, because as we know, the ICC profile, the color profile, has been set on the export. When you have a raw file comes out of the camera, it doesn't matter if you shot it in sRGB or Adobe RGB. This one has been set using the raw converter. So, but as I said, I wouldn't be finished, and here it comes where I would jump, in this case, to my film pack and simply add some grain on the image. And you see directly it comes in, because here, in case we have an ADOX, I would be happy with a Fuji jump into the 100% look. And here I can not only choose the intensity of the grain, I also have the possibility to change size as I want. So it's the size of the grain and the intensity, so that I do not end up with a too digital look image when I already came up and wanted to create a more classically film look in a quick workflow like we did here. As I said before, what I missed was the white balance in this part of my workflow, and I would grab to this when I add a different image. Of course, these parts are not black. They're simply shown black because we have our highlight control on. And it shows me directly, okay, here is no color information. You burned it out, Jochen, sorry for that. And when I see this image and I see this burn out and it looks here already a little bit foggy, I know that this is, for my workflow now, looks like, let's do a black and white shot. And here on the style toning, I simply use the black and white and end up in a black and white shot. I haven't done anything else. If you're coming up with a film pack, you would even have a channel mixer for mixing the black and white. But one powerful tool for your black and whites is the white balance. The white balance we didn't touch at all because we trusted the automatically shot in our colored image. Is here now one which on the first look only gives me the opportunity to choose between shot, tungsten, daylights, flash, underwater, custom. You can switch on custom. Okay, then it can switch here, but what makes it easier is you get the little plus sign here. As I said before, always have a careful watch, look at your workspaces, and pressing it, it opens me up my manual sliders. And you see what happens by moving the white balance. I get a completely different creation of a black and white without losing any quality of an image, because I'm only changing the white point, the white balance, for setting up this way. And the same as with the tone. I'll kind of a look on the first quick way of editing my shot. And as I remembered, okay, we had a problem with the lights. We still have, we might jump on our highlights. In this case, we just leave this automatic smart lighting off, and we bring in back maybe a bit the highlights, and we say, okay, this is not enough. If we want to print, we want to avoid these burnt out parts, because if you do printing or whatever, your printer simply doesn't print at these parts because there's no information. So we go in our local adjustments, creating a new mask, and this time we use a U-point, catching this area and just bringing it back a bit. And here we're quite happy. Getting contrast off, so softens up a little bit these parts. And we're quite fast with deleting this problem. So we're back in selective tones, so still want to have a bit back. The midtones. In this case, I'm now will look like a little more dirty looking black and white where I want to go to. We have the same here, working with the shadows, the blacks. DxO Clear View here in this case we can add locally. There's not much dust in the image, but we're coming up, and still for me it's like, wow, this part of the image looks for me too light, because I want to follow my view into the image to the back, and I'm always stuck on this boat. So here we have two different ways of going there. If you have the film pack, you got the choice between the channel mix and have a look. Okay, and this way this was which color it was. You could switch back or just keep on trying, as I now do, to get a little bit better, not forcing it too much. And I remembered I was in local adjustments, I was here, but I need another new mask. Because I want this boat a little bit darkened up and not like painted up. I have it in this case done like that. So I have still the reflection kept here, but it's now looks a little bit more that like the three ones coming behind. So my view is not only stuck on there, so I have now a view looking in there, and then I say, okay, I might even add vignetting to this image. But first of all, as we remembered, as I said, the presets, the standard preset gives us this serves from the automatic mode. Have a look what happens if I switch this off. That's too much. But remember I said you got to all automatically corrections, always a slider where you can adjust it manual, and I would say that's quite nice. I still got visible structure on the blacks coming up here. So for a quick workflow on the black and white, the white balance is one of my really, really powerful tools. So we haven't talked about noise reduction. Noise reduction is for me a tool I need when I want to be, of course, reduce the noise of the image. Clearly, that's what I want to use it. But the other point is I have a look at an image, and when I shoot and I know I got a powerful noise reduction, I can use my ISO as a creative part. For example, we're going here, I prepared myself a bit at two images, edit with a star, and I will tell my image, do not show me the unrated picture, please. And I've got image 1. And image 2. By watching at this image, and for the people who ever come to Wuppertal or whatever, we have here free printing workshops with Ilford and people coming in. I wouldn't judge one of the images as being badly destroyed or whatever by quality. They're looking different. They're the same angle, they're shot at the same time, nearly only a few minutes between, but you see in here, we keep movement in the water, which we've lost at this shot. Simply because it's a long exposure you have during nighttime. If you're stuck on basic ISO, you have a longer exposure time, and this obviously ends up in a more blurred water. But if you want to prefer this water, you have to get the ISO up, gives you a shorter exposure time and keeping a little bit movement in the water. And here it comes to the noise reduction. We have DxO PhotoLab. It gives us the opportunity to really use ISO as a creative tool to get the exposure time we want. As you see, I shot it as an ISO 3200, and on purpose I took an old image with a really, really amateur camera. It's a Nikon D3100, and you usually would say there's no point of using a shot like this. This was a maximum ISO coming out of this camera. This is a raw file. And in this raw file, we have a look at noise reduction. Noise reduction is now off. This is, of course, not the noise. Here we have still our exposure control on, our histogram warning. And if we have a look at, this was grain we had in this image. And our noise reduction prime gives us the opportunity to really work with the ISO, as you saw before in the image. So if you switch it on, prime, you can only see in the small image here the effect. On the whole view, you won't see it. You won't see the difference, how it's applied by moving the move and zoom window. You have the little target window here in the detail where you set the part and want to see how prime worked there. So do not always stuck on this based ISOs. Be creative, because by the time all these noise reductions are getting really, really powerful, even editing some of the older shots you have. What we haven't seen is a quick look when it's necessary to have a little control of our geometric controls. And if you see the image here, this is already the controlled image. Because what you see here is a geometric control comes for my second tool. As I said, I only have film packer viewpoint as well. And this is my perspective control. The image shot was like that. You got the possibility, of course, to do it control by hand, by your lines. And then you still see this one is not really looking nice. It's Venice. I mean, they're not being built perfectly straight. Here we have the possibility to really give it an auto mode if we want to. And it's completely straightened. If you use a straighten mode like this, and what you saw now in the image, you might lose. Always depends on how you shot the image, how unstraightened the lines in an image are. Watch out that you have enough space. I mean, by now we're talking about cameras with megapixels, 36, 40, 50 millions of megapixels. Shoot with a little bit more wide open, so you have space if you want to cut out and use the viewpoint technology. What you see down here are the portraits we will work on tomorrow's webinar with our portrait mode. And at this time, I really have to say thank you for listening to me to our webinar.